All right, so the Panthers facing elimination tonight, 3-0. 3-0 so far this postseason. The Panthers are in facing elimination, looking to get back to sunrise for what would be a game six. And joining us here, really happy to be joined. It's been a while. Kenny Albert, NHL on TNT, voice of the Stanley Cup Finals. Thanks for joining us here, Kenny. And, the first thing I want to say is I love TNT's coverage of the National Hockey League. I feel like from obviously the game broadcast, you and Eddie but the studio show, Gretzky and Bissonnette and Anson Carter and Lundqvist and Liam McHugh. This is a tremendous first year for the NHL on TNT, right?
Well, I appreciate it, Jonathan. The executives at TNT put together a tremendous crew, both the game broadcasters on the two crews that we have, and I'm obviously biased, but the pregame show has been unbelievable with the folks you mentioned, led by Liam McHugh, Anson Carter, Paul Bissonnette, obviously the great one, Wayne Gretzky, and then last year it was Rick Tocchet. He took over as coach in Vancouver this year, replaced by Henrik Lundqvist. And the synergy between us, the game crew, and the pregame crew, they've been out on the road during the Stanley Cup Final, both in Vegas and Fort Lauderdale. We spent a lot of time together, and even off the air, just sitting around listening to the stories from whether it's Wayne Gretzky or Biz or Henrik Lundqvist, Anson Carter. You just learn so much by being around those guys. And then Charles Barkley joined them on the pregame show prior to Game 4, and he's such a big hockey fan. So I think it's brought a lot of focus to the NHL. TNT arguably has the best sports studio show of all time with inside the NBA. I put it right up there with the NFL on Fox pregame show over the last 29 years. And they do baseball as well, do a great job with MLB in the regular season and postseason. But I think they've raised the bar with hockey, with the studio show, and the fact that they're on the road with us during the final makes it even better.
It's amazing, it's impossible to, and we see it with other networks who have tried. It's impossible to replicate what TNT has done with Inside the NBA. It's an all-time great studio show. I think it's the greatest ever. And obviously, we're very early on here with the NHL on TNT studio show, but it feels like they're doing it here with the NHL as well, where their studio show, it's so good right off the bat.
And with the NBA show with Charles and Shaq, those guys are megastars. They can walk down the street anywhere and everybody coming the other way would know who they are. And Ernie Johnson and Kenny Smith do a great job as well. But by bringing in Wayne Gretzky the first year last year, that just I think Turner basically said to the hockey world and the sports world, we want the best, no matter what the sport is. And he doesn't work every week during the regular season, but in the playoffs, he's been there throughout the conference final and the Stanley Cup final. And, the number of eyeballs watching the Stanley Cup final is obviously bigger than what it is during the regular season. And those guys have just raised the bar. They really have. And we're excited to be back here in Vegas for Game 5. I know the Panthers and their fans certainly hoping that the series shifts back to sunrise for a Game 6. So we'll see what happens tonight here in Vegas. And we've seen the Panthers do it before, coming back from 3-1 in that first round series against Boston.
And real quick on Gretzky, I want to mention he's gotten so much better from last year to this year, which is so impressive to me because, look, he's the greatest hockey player ever. And the fact that he's certainly willing to get better at this craft, he doesn't have to be a broadcaster. He's Wayne Gretzky. Like, Michael Jordan is not going to go on a broadcast and be a full-time broadcaster and work on that craft. It's pretty impressive that Gretzky's doing this.
It really is. And it's like those old E.F. Hutton commercials. You and I are probably around the same age. When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. When Wayne Gretzky talks, you just shut up and listen to the stories, to whatever he has to say on the pregame show, on the postgame show, during the intermissions. He's the greatest player of all time. And he really seems to enjoy being on the road during the final. And last year it was during the conference final with us in Denver and Edmonton, and just spreading his gospel on the sport of hockey. And his recall, his knowledge is nearly perfect. And I can listen to the stories all day long. And I've heard many of them a number of times, and it never gets old.
There's no one else like that, right? In other sports, we could do Michael Jordan, LeBron James. In football, we could do Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers. Baseball, pick any number of guys. Like for hockey, Gretzky is undisputed greatest ever, right?
When you talk to people in the hockey world, they'll throw out the names Gordie Howe and Bobby Orr and Mario Lemieux, obviously. When you ask Wayne, those are the guys he talks about. He puts Gordie Howe and Bobby Orr above him on his personal list, but of course he's being very modest. You look at the numbers, aside from the 4 Stanley Cups and all the awards that he won, more assists than anybody else had points, for example. 92 goal season. The numbers are just astounding. And we grew up watching, I grew up from afar watching the Edmonton Oilers, and you talk to the other players on those teams, whether it's Paul Coffey or Mark Messier, Yari Curry, Glenn Anderson. It was just incredible to watch them play and astounding when you look back at their numbers and his numbers in particular.
So 3-1 series deficit for the Panthers here. I talk about it on my show, and especially because down here in South Florida, you got a lot of new Panther fans. We put together a run, the kind of run that captures a fan base, which it really seems that we've done down here. But I try and explain 3-1 deficit, and granted, we've seen the Panthers do it already this year against Boston, but a 3-1 deficit in hockey, it's different from a 3-1 deficit, say, in the NBA. Teams can come back 3. You really got to go a game at a time. When it's so low scoring, a bounce here, a penalty there, the goalie can just be on fire for 60 minutes. You really just got to look at it one game at a time, right?
Absolutely. Not only that, one shift at a time, one period at a time, one game at a time. And in hockey, goaltender gets hot. Bobrovsky throws up a shutout. They head back to Florida for game 6. Special teams are a key. As you know, it's been 6-0 Vegas on the power play. Panthers don't have a power play goal. They did a much better job of staying out of the penalty box in game 4, giving Vegas only the 1 power play. I'm sure the way the Panthers are looking at it, they might not say it publicly, but if you win this game in Vegas, then you go back home to a raucous home crowd. You've had great success on home ice this year in the playoffs. Then if you win that game, most of the pressure's on Vegas in game 7. Coming back home, they will have had 2 shots to win it, 1 on home ice. So I think if that's the case, the pressure definitely shifts to the Golden Knights in game 7. Right now, the Panthers have to put it all out there, kind of playing with house money after almost not making the playoffs. They just squeaked in during the last week, down 3-1 to Boston. And not only down 3-1, Marchand has the breakaway at the end of game 5, stopped by Bobrovsky. They win overtime games in 5 and 7, both on the road against the team that had the best regular season record of all time. Then they beat the Maple Leafs in 5, who had high hopes. They sweep Carolina, and here they are on the Stanley Cup final. So it's been an incredible, Cinderella-type run. And again, I know they're only focusing on this next game, one shift, one period at a time.
Do you look at this Panther team and say this is a team that, no matter what happens tonight, next few nights, maybe, hopefully, that this is a team that's going to be around for a few years?
Well, when you look back at it after the series ends, whenever and however it ends, to win the President's Trophy one year and get to the Stanley Cup final the next year is very impressive. I'm not sure everybody around the league and the media, gave the credit to the Panthers, that they deserved last year, because they only won the first round series, which they hadn't done in a quarter of a century, but get swept by Tampa in the second round. Then they come back this year, new coach, and it's a struggle during the regular season. They were in a playoff spot for less than 30% of the regular season. But again, you have to give high marks to Bill Zito for pulling the trigger on the Tkachuk deal and some of the other moves he made. Paul Maurice has done an outstanding job. He's among the top 6 in history in games coached and wins during the regular season. He's in the Cup final for the second time in his career. And then when you look at the players and what they've been able to do, led by Matthew Tkachuk and Barkov and Ekblad and Bobrovsky right on down the line. So it's been a remarkable story, and we'll see if they have more than one game left in them.
What do you make of Tkachuk moving forward? Because this fan base, we've never had a guy like this. And when we traded for him early in the year, I was like, the Panther fan is going to love this guy. We've never had this guy who's gritty and physical. and he plays with an attitude, and he has fun when he's playing, and he's great in front of the microphone. He's an excellent talker, and Kenny, he's American. So like going forward, it feels like he could be one of the faces of the NHL.
Absolutely. I think he has become that during these playoffs. The trade was shocking to all of us when it happened. Jonathan Huberdeau, 100-point scorer. Matthew Tkachuk, 100-point scorer. Obviously, there were contract issues involved on both sides. Calgary did not want to lose Tkachuk for nothing after this season had he stayed as an unrestricted free agent. Huberdeau's contract as well was a factor. And it only happened once. Wayne Gretzky for Jimmy Carson, and there were others involved. But that was the only other time 100-point scorers were traded for each other in the same deal. But you look at his age, 25, the type of player he is, and his brother's pretty similar up in Ottawa. Brady Tkachuk. There are 30 other teams in the league that would give their left arm to have a Matthew or a Brady Tkachuk on their team. Every team would love to have them.
Do you ever, like in the middle of these games, do you ever think to yourself, I can't believe how tough these guys are. It's so physical. I mean, guy takes a puck. It was earlier in the postseason. I forget who it was for us. Took a puck in the face. He was back out 5 minutes later. I mean, an NBA player gets hit in the face, is out for the year, Like, do you ever think about during the game, these guys, I mean, they're just the toughest guys in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a player on Winnipeg, Morgan Barron, earlier in the playoffs, 75 stitches in his mouth and around his mouth. Came back, played in the game. You see Jack Eichel, take that hard hit in one of the games in Vegas, misses only 4 minutes. He takes a puck to the side of the face in game 4. Tkachuk, we had shots of him, looks like some kind of an arm or shoulder issue, and misses the 10 minutes in game 4, and then comes back and almost ties the game. We actually rode back, myself, Eddie Olczyk, Keith Jones, Darren Pang, with Charles Barkley to our hotel after games 3 and 4 in Fort Lauderdale. And he was marveling. He's such a big hockey fan. And he said the same thing that you just said. He said these hockey players, all they want to do is win the Stanley Cup, and they'll put their bodies on the line, and they'll do anything to try and win that trophy.
Like every single one of these guys, no one's missing time. Every single one of these guys is dealing with some kind of injury, right?
Right. There are legendary stories about players playing with broken legs, broken bones in their leg. Gregory Campbell, who was a Panther for a long time when he was in Boston, played with a broken leg for a couple of shifts back in the playoffs. And Bill Barilko was a player back in the 50s who played in the Stanley Cup final with a broken leg. So we've seen examples of it through the years, and you just have to, as Eddie Olczyk would say, tip your hockey helmet to these guys who battle for over 100 games this year. Both the Panthers and Golden Knights have played over 100 games. And I'm sure after the series ends, we always hear about the 4 surgeries and 6 other injuries that guys have to undergo, or injuries that they played through just to get to where they want to be. And that's lifting the Stanley Cup at the end of the season.
Now, the Stanley Cup is in the building tonight. We're hoping that it has to make a trip to Sunrise afterward, but it's in the building tonight. Does it still, I mean, it must, it still get you the way that it gets me, where the Panthers don't have to be playing in the Stanley Cup final, but I'm watching the Stanley Cup final, whatever year it is, and I have to watch the whole ceremony. There's something about it when they bring that Stanley Cup onto the ice and then they give it to the captain and hand it around. There's something about that Stanley Cup.
I definitely get emotional every time I see it, whether I'm in the building or watching on TV, even if it's a team that I have no ties to. To me, it's the greatest trophy in sports. It's the greatest celebration. It doesn't go to an owner or the GM or the coach. It goes right to the captain, and then they pass it along to the other players, and then they take that group photo on the ice, and they continue to celebrate, and their families come down on the ice. To me, there's nothing like it in sports, and I definitely get choked up every time. I've been lucky enough to be in the building. I think this will be the 12th time. It's the 10th final I'm working either on radio or television. I've been there for a couple of others, so it never gets old.
Isn't that great? Every other sport, the trophy is first presented to the owner, and the Stanley Cup, always the players first.
Yeah, the New York Times did a story on that the other day. It usually goes to the owner first or team management, but hockey has so many great traditions, and this is right at the top of the list.
Isn't it amazing? Like after the series, and hopefully not tonight, you get the handshakes. These guys, and this has been the first 3 games, especially then, of course, the very end of game 4. for two teams that only see each other twice a year, it's been a lot of animosity this series. And when the series ends, they're going to shake hands and they're able to turn it off and put all that animosity aside.
Yeah, they do. They do. And that's one of the great things about hockey as well. We've seen it through the years. There have been isolated occasions where maybe somebody doesn't shake hands with someone on the other side. We saw the kind of quick handshake between Pietrangelo and Draisaitl after the Vegas-Edmonton series. But a prime example is Tkachuk and Pietrangelo. They've been going at it all series long. At the end of Game 4, Matthew Tkachuk basically grew up skating with Pietrangelo in St. Louis. Pietrangelo was a longtime Blue, captain of the Blues. Matthew Tkachuk, his father played there and spent most of his childhood there, so they know each other very well. They've been battling as hard as they can, but once the series ends, whenever that may be, I'm sure we'll see them shake hands and act like they're the best of friends.
And finally here, Kenny, what have you made of the crowd at FLA Live Arena games 3 and 4? The Panther fan gets a bad rap. Part of it has been, it's been a miserable franchise for most of its existence. But these last 3 years, first time in Panther history, they're in the postseason 3 consecutive years. I really think they're building something great here with the fan base.
I think they have a great fan base. I actually walked around the concourse. I had to go do an interview prior to Game 4 and ran into so many Panther fans, and they were so excited, and the building's been loud, almost as loud as Vegas. Vegas, I think, is the loudest in the league, but I can't say enough about the Panther fans and the entire fan base and how they've supported their team during this entire postseason run.
Great job, Kenny. Really good catching up with you. Have fun tonight. I hope that you're going to have to come down to South Florida for another game.
Well, if I do, we'll look forward to it. From a TV standpoint, we always root for a Game 7, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing like playing in, coaching in, watching, or calling a Game 7. So I certainly wouldn't argue against that, but I also have no control on what goes on the ice. So we'll see what happens. But great to chat with you, Jonathan. Enjoy the game tonight.
Thank you, Kenny.